Hello and welcome back. Thinking in German is an important goal that brings you a giant step closer to becoming fluent. However, many German learners ignore this fact, and when they speak, they translate word for word from their native language into German. Now, German does share grammar and vocabulary with English, for example, but the problem is that more often than not, in German it's used differently. And that's the focus of this section. I'll show you how things work in German so that you can start thinking like a native speaker. Let's start! Hello and welcome back. In this lesson, I'd like to show you how to make a good first impression when you meet people. It happens a lot that when I start a lesson with a new student, I ask, Hallo, wie geht's? Hi, how are you? And the answer I get is, Ich bin gut, I am good. However, that is wrong. The root of the problem is that how are you in German translates to how is it going to you? Wie geht es dir? Or the short form wie geht's? Now, you cannot answer how is it going to you with I am good, as you would do in English. But you have to say it is going well to me. Es geht mir gut. Or simply gut. Alright. Let's have a look at a real dialogue. We'll start with informal German. Hallo, wie geht's? Hello, how are you? Es geht mir gut, danke. Und dir? I'm good, thanks. And you? Es geht mir gut, danke. Und dir? And here it's important to point out that you don't ask und du, but und dir, because it's the dative form. Auch gut, danke. Also good, thanks. Auch gut, danke. And a formal dialogue looks like this. Guten Tag, wie geht es Ihnen? Good afternoon, how are you? Guten Tag, wie geht es Ihnen? Es geht mir gut, danke. Und Ihnen? I'm good, thanks. And you? Es geht mir gut, danke. Und Ihnen? Auch gut. Danke der Nachfrage. Also good, thanks for asking. Auch gut. Danke der Nachfrage. So, what I recommend is actually not trying to understand the exact grammatical rules that are involved here or translating word by word from English to German, but rather learn the German expressions as they are, and then you know that you're saying it right. And that's it. In the next lesson, I'll be talking about another widespread mistake. See you there! In this lesson, I'd like to talk about a mistake that I hear every day, even from advanced speakers. I think it's quite easy to avoid this mistake. You just have to be aware of it, and it makes a big difference. But first, let's have a look at the word order in a typical German sentence. The subject is in the first position. The verb is in the second position, and then comes the object. To refresh your memory, the subject usually performs an action, the verb is the action itself, and the object is affected by the action. I decided to use colors to illustrate the difference between the parts of the sentence in order to make it easier for you to understand what I'm talking about. Ich esse einen Apfel. I eat an apple. Ich esse einen Apfel. Du kaufst ein Buch. You buy a book. Du kaufst ein Buch. You can see that the subject, yellow, is in position number 1 and the verb, red, is in position number 2. That's the important rule, and I repeat, the verb is always in the second position. That's what I would like you to keep in mind. Okay, let's have a look at another sentence. This one does not start with the subject, but with an adverb. And do you see what's happening here? The verb and the subject switched places. Why? Because, according to the rule, the verb has to be in the second position. So the adverb is here in position number 1, the verb in position number 2, then comes the subject, and then the object. Heute esse ich einen Apfel. Today I eat an apple. But what we actually say is, today eat I an apple, with the verb in the second position. The mistake that I'm talking about in this lesson is that many German learners do not switch the subject and the verb when the sentence doesn't start with the subject. And they say, heute ich esse einen Apfel, in the usual English word order. But unfortunately, that is wrong. Mein kleiner Bruder isst eine Pizza. My little brother eats a pizza. I chose this example to show you that the first position in a sentence doesn't necessarily mean the first word in a sentence, because here the subject is my little brother, mein kleiner Bruder, and it has 3 words. The verb ist is in position number 2. And now let's see what happens when I start the sentence with manchmal, sometimes. Manchmal isst mein kleiner Bruder eine Pizza. Sometimes my little brother eats a pizza. The verb and the subject switched places, so that, according to the rule, the verb stays in the second position in the sentence. Du hast einen Orangensaft getrunken. You drank an orange juice. This is an example using the past tense, and the conjugated verb here is hast. And if we want to emphasize that you drank the orange juice yesterday, we say, gestern hast du einen Orangensaft getrunken. Yesterday you drank an orange juice. And again, hast and du switch position. Gestern hast du einen Orangensaft getrunken. The same rule is also applied to modal verbs, such as können, which means can or to be able to do something. Ich kann die Berge sehen. I can see the mountains. Normalerweise kann ich die Berge sehen. Usually I can see the mountains. Here the change in the word order is triggered because the sentence starts with usually and not with the subject. Alright, this was the first part of the lesson, and I'll be right back in the second part. Hello and welcome back. In the first part of the lesson, we've seen simple sentences. Now let's have a closer look at some more complex ones. Ich lese ein Buch. I read a book, or I'm reading a book. In German there is no difference. Ich mag Geschichte. Deshalb lese ich ein Buch. I like history, therefore I'm reading a book. You see that in the subordinate clause, the verb and the subject switched places, so that the verb remains in the second position. Ich mag Geschichte, deshalb lese ich ein Buch. Sie geht spazieren. She's going for a walk. Es regnet. Trotzdem geht sie spazieren. It's raining. Nevertheless, she's going for a walk. And again, the same thing happens in the subordinate clause. Geht comes before sie. Es regnet. Trotzdem geht sie spazieren. Du spielst Tennis. Du spielst Basketball. You play tennis. You play basketball. Zuerst spielst du Tennis, dann spielst du Basketball. First you play tennis, then you play basketball. So we connected the two sentences with first and then. These words take the first position, and that's why the verb has to follow immediately in order to stay in the second position. Now, as you know, the exception proves the rule, and that's why I'd like to show you some exceptions. The words aber, but, und, and then, because, are considered position 0. They do not change the word order. Kommt aus London, aber studiert in Zürich. He comes from London, but he studies in Zurich. Sie spielt Gitarre und singt in einer Band. She plays the guitar and he sings in a band. Ich rufe dich an, denn ich möchte mit dir sprechen. I'm calling you because I'd like to talk to you. In all three examples, the word order remains first subject, then verb. And last but not least, I'd like to mention that there is another exception. Some words such as das, that, weil, because, and als, when in the past tense, these words send the verb to the end of the sentence rather than just switching the position with the subject. But that's a topic for another lesson. So basically, the most important insight that I would like you to take from this lesson is that when you don't start a sentence with the subject, you need to change the word order. If you do this, it shows that you're really taking your German seriously. If you are like most German language learners, you've probably come across the following dilemma when it comes to verbs in the past tense. When do I use the verb haben, to have, and when do I use the verb sein, to be? The textbook answer is that the past tense in German is usually formed by using the verb haben and the past participle. Ich habe Deutsch gelernt. I learned German. Ich habe Deutsch gelernt. And if there is a movement involved or a change of state, then you use sein. Ich bin nach Berlin gefahren. I went to Berlin. Ich bin nach Berlin gefahren. Now, this is the official explanation and it makes sense, but I've seen that many students are still finding it hard to choose the right verb when forming the past tense. So I came up with the following not so official rule, but I think it makes it easier to understand the difference between haben and sein. Okay, so this is how it works. If you can sit in a chair while performing the action you're talking about, you use haben. And if you cannot sit in a chair while performing the action you're talking about, you use sein. Let's have a look at some examples and we'll start with haben. Ich habe den Apfel gegessen. I ate the apple. Ich habe den Apfel gegessen. Er hat ein Glas Rotwein getrunken. He drank a glass of red wine. Er hat ein Glas Rotwein getrunken. Wir haben den Film gesehen. We saw the film. Wir haben den Film gesehen. It's possible to do all of this while sitting in a chair. Eat an apple, drink wine, and see a film. That's why you form the past tense for all these examples with haben. And now I'll show you some sentences with sein. Sie ist nach Hause gegangen. She went home. Sie ist nach Hause gegangen. Du bist heute Morgen im Park gelaufen. You ran in the park this morning. Du bist heute Morgen im Park gelaufen. Ihr seid vom Stuhl aufgestanden. You guys got up from the chair. Ihr seid vom Stuhl aufgestanden. You see that all these things cannot be done while sitting in a chair. You cannot go, run, or even get up from a chair while sitting in a chair. So here you have to use sein. And that's the simple rule to distinguish between haben and sein when forming the past tense in German. In this lesson, I'd like to talk about an important difference between German and English. Many people say that English is a very easy language and German is so difficult. Now, I do agree that the gender and case system in German makes the language more difficult than English, but when it comes to verb tenses, I think German is pretty simple. Let's take a look at the verb to go, for example. I went. I have gone. I have been going. I go. I am going. I will go. In German, you need only two verb tenses in order to cover all of these scenarios. Ich bin gegangen and ich gehe. Present and past. The future can be expressed by using the present tense and a word that indicates future time. So in German, it's perfectly fine to say, tomorrow I buy a book. But in this lesson, I'd like to focus on the fact that in German, there is no verb tense that can imply that something started in the past and is still going on in the present. like the present perfect in English. I have worked at the bank for 25 years. Now, what this means is that you started to work for the bank 25 years ago and you are still working there. And because of this, you would use the present tense in German. Ich arbeite seit 25 Jahren bei der Bank. If you say, ich habe gearbeitet, I have worked, as you do in English, I would understand that you're not working there anymore because you use the past tense. Alright, here are some more examples. I have learned German for 3 years. Many German learners say, ich habe für 3 Jahre Deutsch gelernt. It's pretty much a word-for-word translation, have learned, habe gelernt. However, this is wrong. Because you are still learning German, so you need to use the present tense. Ich lerne seit 3 Jahren Deutsch. And you see that we say seit 3 Jahren, since 3 years, and not für 3 Jahre, for 3 years, as you would say in English. I have lived in Berlin for 3 weeks. As you might guess, many German students would say, ich habe für 3 Wochen in Berlin gewohnt. But now you already know that this is wrong and that you should say, ich wohne seit 3 Wochen in Berlin. So a short recap. In German, the most important verb tenses are present tense and past tense. When something happened in the past, you use past tense. When something happens now, you use present tense. There is no verb tense in between. Okay, up next, I'll be talking about another interesting difference between German and English. See you there. In the last lesson, I was talking about the fact that there are no verb tenses in German that compare to I have done or I have been doing. It's either I did or I do. Now, in this lesson, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that German also doesn't have a progressive verb tense. What does that mean? It means that you cannot express that something is happening right now simply by using a specific verb tense, such as the present progressive in English. For example, there is no way of saying I am reading or I am eating in German. You can only say I read or I eat. Let's have a closer look. I am reading the newspaper. If you translate this word for word, and that's what many German learners do, you get Ich bin lesen die Zeitung. That looks like an accurate translation, but it's wrong. What you do say is Ich lese die Zeitung. Literally, I read the newspaper. In German, there is no difference between I am reading the newspaper and I read the newspaper. Both are Ich lese die Zeitung. Another example. It is raining. This is what I hear a lot. Es ist regnet. A word-for-word translation. But unfortunately, that's not how we say it. In correct German, you say Es regnet. Alright, that was the present tense. Now let's check out some examples in the past tense, because in English there is the past progressive, or also called past continuous. He was cooking in the kitchen. And the following translation: war kochen in der Küche. What do you think? Is this correct? Exactly, it's not. He was cooking in the kitchen translates to hat in der Küche gekocht. Why? Because, again, in German there is no progressive verb tense, such as was doing or were doing. When an action happened in the past, you use the past tense. And in spoken German, that's usually the tense called perfect, that is formed with haben or sein and the past participle. Hat in der Küche gekocht. And here is another example. They were watching TV when he called. A word-for-word translation would look like this. Sie waren Fernsehen, wenn angerufen hat. But, of course, this is wrong, and you already know that you should use the past tense in German, and the correct translation looks like this. Sie haben ferngesehen, als angerufen hat. They were watching TV when he called. You might wonder, why is it als and not wenn? Don't worry, there will be a lesson on this topic later in the course. Okay, so the next question is, I get it, in German there is no continuous verb tense. But what do Germans do when they want to especially emphasize that something's happening right now? Well, the answer is, there is a workaround. We use the verb together with gerade, a word you could translate as at the moment. And gerade is usually placed after the verb. Kannst du mich später anrufen? Ich esse gerade. Can you call me later? I'm eating. Or as we literally say in German, I eat at the moment. Kannst du mich später anrufen? Ich esse gerade. Ich trinke gerade eine Tasse Kaffee. I'm drinking a cup of coffee. Ich trinke gerade eine Tasse Kaffee. Wir spielen gerade Basketball. Willst du mitspielen? We're playing basketball. Do you want to play along? Wir spielen gerade Basketball. Willst du mitspielen? Alright, so a short summary is that expressing the progressiveness of a verb is not possible in German by the sheer use of grammatical structures. I am doing something in English would be translated to the equivalent of I do something in German. And I was doing something in English would be translated to the equivalent of I did something in German. Having said that, there is a way of expressing that the action is taking place now, and that's the word gerade after the verb. Okay, I think that's it. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them on the discussion board, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Hello and welcome back. In this lesson, I'd like to talk about another interesting concept that exists both in English and in German, but it is applied differently, and that often leads to confusion among German learners. I'm talking about the word ago. The German translation of ago is vor. Now the difference is that in English, ago is placed after the time indication, and in German, vor is placed before the time indication. Let's have a look at an example. A year ago. If you translate word for word, you get ein Jahr vor. But that is wrong. The correct way of saying it is vor einem Jahr. You might have noticed that vor requires the dative case, because it's not vor ein Jahr, but vor einem Jahr. In the dative case, ein becomes einem, and eine becomes einer. Here is another example. The last game was a month ago. The word-for-word translation is Das letzte Spiel war ein Monat vor. But now you already know that this is wrong. You have to put the vor before ein Monat and apply the dative case. So the correct translation is Das letzte Spiel war vor einem Monat. Let's check out some more examples, and all of these are correct. Ich habe vor einer Woche ein Auto gekauft. I bought a car a week ago. This is an example with a feminine noun, eine Woche, a week. And you see that eine Woche became einer Woche. And by the way, you hardly pronounce the R at the end of the word. Ich habe vor einer Woche ein Auto gekauft. Du warst vor einem Jahr in London. You were in London a year ago. Du warst vor einem Jahr in London. Wir sind vor 2 Stunden im Hotel angekommen. We arrived at the hotel 2 hours ago. Wir sind vor 2 Stunden im Hotel angekommen. Alright, so that was a short explanation about the different usage of ago in German and in English. In English it goes after the time indication, a year ago, and in German it goes before the time indication, vor einem Jahr. In the next lesson I'll be talking a bit more about the German word order, and I'll also show you an easy rule for getting the sentence structure right. See you there! One of the things most German learners are struggling with is the German word order. This is because it's different from English and many other languages. Now, if you'd like to form a proper German sentence, you cannot use the English word order and simply translate the words. What you need to do is understand how it works in German and use that different structures. And the key that makes German word order simple is an acronym called TeKaMoLo. In this lesson, you will learn how to use it. It might look a bit complicated at first, but please watch the lesson until the end and it will all make sense. Alright, let's break the acronym down. You know, every part of the sentence has a specific function. When does it happen is called temporal, and the first 2 letters are te, te. Why does it happen is called causal, and the first 2 letters are ka. How does it happen is called modal, and the first 2 letters are mo. And where does it happen is called lokal, with the first 2 letters lo. So, in German, the standard sentence structure is subject, verb, TeKaMoLo. Let's take a look at an example in English to better understand what I'm talking about. Today I'm going to Berlin by bus for a wedding. You see that I packed a lot of information in this example so that you can see all of the parts of the sentence in action, but actually most sentences are much simpler than this. Okay, and now we'll identify all the TeKaMoLos. Te, when do I go there? Today, or in German, heute. Ka, why do I go there? For a wedding. Wegen einer Hochzeit. Mo, how do I go there? By bus. Mit dem Bus. Lo, where am I going? To Berlin. Nach Berlin. And now the whole sentence in German. Ich fahre heute wegen einer Hochzeit mit dem Bus nach Berlin. Alright, I said before that not every sentence has all the different parts that I mentioned in my example. Here we have a sentence without te, temporal, and ka, causal. Ich fahre mit dem Bus nach Berlin. I'm going to Berlin by bus. Mo is how, mit dem Bus. And lo is where, nach Berlin. The next sentence has only a ka and lo part. Ich fahre zum Shoppen nach Berlin. I'm going to Berlin to shop. Ka is why, zum Shoppen. Lo is where, nach Berlin. Okay, here is in my opinion one of the most common examples with time and location. Ich fahre morgen nach Berlin. I'm going to Berlin tomorrow. Te, when, morgen. Lo, where, nach Berlin. The next example is the same sentence but in the past tense, and you see that the past participle has its usual place at the end of the sentence. Ich bin gestern nach Berlin gefahren. I went to Berlin yesterday. Te, when, gestern. Lo, where, nach Berlin. Now, there is an exception to this rule. If you'd like to make a special emphasis, one of the TeKaMoLos can be placed at the beginning of the sentence. The others stick to their order. Here, for example, I put the ka particle at the beginning of the sentence. Wegen einer Hochzeit fahre ich heute nach Berlin. Because of a wedding, I'm going to Berlin today. So I'm really emphasizing why I'm going to Berlin. The other parts of the sentence stick to their order. And as you remember from one of my previous lectures, the verb is always in position 2. That's why you cannot say wegen einer Hochzeit ich fahre heute nach Berlin, but you have to switch the subject and the verb and say wegen einer Hochzeit fahre ich heute nach Berlin. So that is how German word order works. I know it looks confusing at first, but you will get a feeling for it the longer you learn the language. As I mentioned, the most common sentence structure is a sentence with a time and a location. So if there is only one thing you take from this lesson, then please remember that in German, time always comes before location. And that's it. I'll see you in the next lesson. Hello and welcome back. As you probably know, German and English both belong to the same branch of the Indo-European language family, which is called the Germanic languages. Here are some of them. While many English words are derived from Latin and French for historic reasons, about a third of the words are of Germanic and in particular German origin. And the percentage of these words used in everyday conversations is very high. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that you already know a lot of German vocabulary without even being aware of it. This is just a very short list of similar or even identical words in English and in German. There are many more, and some people even say the total count is somewhere between 1,500 and 5,000 in the standard language. You see, that's a huge advantage when you learn German. However, the similarity also creates a linguistic phenomenon, and you need to be aware of this. It's called false friends. What is a false friend? A false friend is a word in a language that looks or sounds similar to a word in another language, but means something different. And in this lesson, I'd like to focus on one of the most common false friends between English and German, the word will. Let's have a look at an example. Ich will nach Berlin fahren. You might think, hey, this is easy. The translation is, I will go to Berlin. But that's wrong. The correct translation is, I want to go to Berlin. Will in German does not have the same meaning as will in English. It's a form of the verb wollen, to want. Let's have a closer look at the conjugation of this verb. Ich will, I want. Du willst, you want. Sie, es will. He, she, it wants. Wir wollen, we want. Ihr wollt, you guys want. Sie wollen. They, or formal you, want. So if you'd like to say that you want to do something, you use the conjugated verb wollen and the respective action in its infinitive form at the end of the sentence. Here are some examples. Ich will nach Berlin fahren. I want to go to Berlin. You see the first person form of the verb wollen, will, and the verb to go in its infinitive form. That's the form you find in a dictionary at the end of the sentence. Ich will nach Berlin fahren. Du willst mir helfen. You want to help me. Will mitkommen? Does he want to come along? Will mitkommen? Alright, now you know that will in German doesn't describe an action in the future, but something you want or want to do. And how does German form the future tense? Well, we use the conjugated auxiliary verb werden and the action verb in its infinitive at the end of the sentence. Let's check out some future tense examples with the conjugated forms of werden. Ich werde Deutsch lernen. I will learn German. Du wirst in Berlin wohnen. You will live in Berlin. Wird bei BMW arbeiten. He will work for BMW. Wir werden nach München ziehen. We will move to Munich. Ihr werdet ein Auto kaufen. You guys will buy a car. Sie werden eine Wohnung finden. They will find an apartment. Okay, that's what I wanted to tell you about the false friend will or will. I will also add a PDF file with an interesting list of other false friends so that you can get an even better understanding of this phenomenon. In the next lesson, I'll be talking a little bit more about the verb wollen, to want, in order to show you another important difference between German and English. See you there! So today I'd like to talk a little bit more about the verb wollen, to want. In the last lesson we saw that it's a false friend with the English word will, and we had a closer look at the present tense use. Just a small reminder. Ich will essen. I want to eat. You see that in this example the verb wollen is conjugated in the first person, will, and then we have a second verb in the infinitive form at the end of the sentence. Essen, to eat. Ich will essen. That's how it works in the present tense. And here are some more examples. Wollt ihr einen Kaffee trinken? Do you guys want to drink a coffee? Wollt ihr einen Kaffee trinken? Sie will heute mit ihrem Sohn spazieren gehen. She wants to go for a walk with her son today. Sie will heute mit ihrem Sohn spazieren gehen. Okay, and here is an example using the past tense. Ich wollte eine Pizza bestellen. I wanted to order a pizza. Ich wollte eine Pizza bestellen. As you can see, in order to express the past tense, I used the so-called Präteritum for the verb wollen. Ich wollte, I wanted. Usually, in spoken language, we tend to use the present perfect tense when we're talking about something in the past. In German, it's called perfect, and you form it with the verb haben or sein and the Partizip zwei, or in English, past participle. Some quick examples. Kaufen, to buy. Ich habe ein Auto gekauft. I bought a car. Essen, to eat. Du hast einen Apfel gegessen. You ate an apple. Gehen, to walk. Wir sind nach Hause gegangen. We went home. This is how you usually form the past tense. With modal verbs, however, you use the Präteritum, and wollen is such a modal verb. Let's have a look at the conjugation of wollen in the past tense. Ich wollte, I wanted. Du wolltest, you wanted. Sie, es wollte. He, she, it wanted. Wir wollten, we wanted. Ihr wolltet, you guys wanted. Sie, wollten. They, or formal you, wanted. So when we slightly modified the examples we just saw and add the verb to want in the past tense, this is how it will look like. Ich wollte ein Auto kaufen. I wanted to buy a car. As in the present tense, you see the conjugated form of wollen, but this time in the past tense and the infinitive form of the second verb at the end of the sentence. Du wolltest einen Apfel essen. You wanted to eat an apple. Wir wollten nach Hause gehen. We wanted to go home. Okay, so that was wollen in the past tense. Another way of using the verb to want in English is the following. To want someone to do something. For example, I want you to read a book. Now this also exists in German, but it looks different. If you translate the sentence word for word, you get Ich will du lesen ein Buch. But unfortunately that's wrong. You need to use a das construction. Ich will, dass du ein Buch liest. I want that you a book read. That's the literal translation. And you see that das sends the verb to the end of the sentence. Ich will, dass du ein Buch liest. He wants me to meet his parents. Will, dass ich seine Eltern kennenlerne. Literally we say, he wants that I, his parents, meet. Another example. I want you to come to my birthday party. Ich will, dass du zu meiner Geburtstagsparty kommst. And again, if you translate word for word, so you get a better understanding of the sentence structure, it will look like this. I want that you to my birthday party come, with the verb at the end. Alright, today you've learned a lot about this important verb, and now you can actively use it when you speak German. On a side note, I'd like to mention that if you're addressing somebody and ask for something, it's more polite to say ich möchte rather than ich will. As in English, it's more polite to say I would like rather than I want. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and I see you in the next lesson. I usually say that German is a very logic language. Yes, there are many rules and many exceptions, a complex gender and case system, long words and strange sounds. But the language is pretty accurate and does make sense once you understand how it works. Today, however, I'd like to show you an example where German has a bit of a problem with accuracy. I'm talking about distinguishing between a friend and a significant other. Here is a short overview. Der Freund is the male friend. Die Freundin, the female friend. And now let's look at an example sentence. Ich gehe mit meinem Freund ins Theater. I'm going to the theater with my friend. The problem here is that the meaning is ambiguous. It could mean that you're going to the theater with a friend, but it's more likely that people will understand that you're going to the theater with your boyfriend. Why? Because it's become widely accepted to use mein Freund as a code for my boyfriend and meine Freundin for my girlfriend, although the literal meaning is simply my friend. For example, Martina ist meine Freundin. Martina is my girlfriend. Alright, let's get back to our ambiguous sample sentence. Ich gehe mit meinem Freund ins Theater. In the lesson title I mentioned that one letter can make the difference between a friend and a boyfriend. And it's right here, this M. And now see what happens. The M is gone. Mein Freund became ein Freund. This is one strategy to avoid misunderstandings and ambiguity, the use of the indefinite article. And this is very common. You can also say ein Freund von mir or eine Freundin von mir, which means a friend of mine. Martina ist eine Freundin von mir. Martina is a friend of mine. And this makes it clear that she's not your girlfriend, but a platonic friend. So we thought we found a solution to our problem, but, surprise, it's not as simple as that. You cannot always use this strategy, because it might conflict with other rules how to use the articles. Let's have a look at an example in order to understand better what I'm talking about. Ich war gestern mit einer Freundin beim Shoppen. Yesterday I went to shop with a friend of mine. So far, so good. It's clear that she's not my girlfriend. Ich wollte rote Schuhe kaufen, aber meine Freundin mag rot nicht. I wanted to buy red shoes, but my friend doesn't like red. And here, Houston, we have a problem. Am I talking about the friend who came with me to shop? Or is it my girlfriend that wasn't even there? We don't know. Okay, so we just learned use a friend of mine instead. Will that work? Ich war gestern mit einer Freundin beim Shoppen. Yesterday I went to shop with a friend. Ich wollte rote Schuhe kaufen, aber eine Freundin von mir mag rot nicht. I wanted to buy red shoes, but a friend of mine doesn't like red. No, this doesn't really work because you will assume that I just introduced another friend that I haven't mentioned before. So we need to stick to my friend, and this is where the story will be ambiguous. You can also use other words than Freund or Freundin if you mean boyfriend or girlfriend, Partner for a man, or Partnerin for a woman, for example, means partner. Lebensgefährte for a man or Lebensgefährtin for a woman is significant other. Fester Freund is a steady boyfriend, and feste Freundin, a steady girlfriend. The thing is that they sound very formal and are usually used for long-term relationships or when a couple lives together. So that is the problem the German language faces, and you need to be aware of this in order to avoid misunderstandings. Now, of course, communications rarely occur in a vacuum, and in many cases the context will be helpful for understanding. But I also wanted to give you an insight into how native speakers deal with such situations. Thanks for watching. Good job! You just finished the first section of the course and made a big step on your German learning journey. Remember that you can always rewind and watch a lecture again if you think I went too fast. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask and I'll be happy to help.